At the Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter shouted, "You've always been a burden. Get out of our lives." I quietly cried as she threw my belongings onto the sidewalk. The following week, she received a copy of my will. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The sound of silverware clinking against china filled the dining room as we sat around the table for our Thanksgiving dinner. I could feel the tension crackling in the air, heavy and oppressive like thunderclouds ready to burst. My daughter Catherine hadn't looked me in the eyes since I arrived, focusing instead on pushing the cranberry sauce around her plate with aggressive precision. Her husband Marcus sat rigidly beside her, his jaw clenched as he stared at his untouched turkey. "The stuffing tastes off," Catherine muttered, her voice sharp with irritation. "I'm sorry, dear. Would you like me to check the seasoning?" I offered, my hands already reaching toward the serving dish. "Don't touch it," she snapped. "Just sit there, Mom." I pulled my hands back, the familiar sting of rejection piercing through my chest. At 68, I'd spent years tiptoeing around my daughter's moods, but something felt different today. More dangerous. "How are your students enjoying the new curriculum, Eleanor?" Marcus asked, his voice strained as he attempted to bridge the silence. Before I could mention that I'd retired from teaching 3 years ago, Catherine cut in. "Mom's old teaching stories are the least of our problems right now." I took a careful sip of water, my fingers trembling slightly. "Is something wrong, Catherine?" She slammed her fork down so hard it made the china rattle. "Yes, something is very wrong. Marcus and I have been discussing our situation, and we've reached a conclusion." Marcus's eyes widened, clearly caught off guard. "We can't continue like this," Catherine continued, her voice rising with each word. "Having you here, constantly requiring attention, monopolizing our space and energy. It's suffocating." My heart began pounding against my ribs. "I don't understand, sweetheart. What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying you need to find alternative living arrangements. We're finished with this arrangement." The words hit me like ice water. "But this has been my home for over 30 years. The place where I raised you after your father died." "Actually," Catherine's tone turned cold and calculating, "legally speaking, the house has been in my name since Dad passed. You remember, don't you? You transferred the deed to protect yourself from potential nursing home costs when you turned 65. I remembered that terrible day. After Theodore died, I'd been drowning in grief and paperwork. Catherine had presented it as a simple protection strategy. "It's purely procedural, Mom," she'd assured me, with what I'd thought was love. "Nothing fundamental will change." Now I saw the trap I'd walked into. "You've been nothing but a financial drain," Catherine said, standing abruptly. "Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain this property? Your prescription medications alone cost us hundreds every month. And don't get me started on driving you to all those medical appointments. I've never demanded, you've always been dependent." She interrupted viciously. "First bleeding Dad dry with your needs and now us." Hot tears gathered behind my eyes. After Theodore died, when Catherine was only 12, I'd worked 3 jobs to provide for her. I'd skipped meals to buy her the designer clothes she demanded, sold my grandmother's jewelry to fund her college sorority fees, delayed my own medical care to pay for her spring break trips. Marcus finally found his voice. "Catherine, this isn't what we discussed." She ignored him completely. "I want you gone by tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's your problem to solve," she said with chilling indifference, stalking out of the room. Marcus sat frozen, his face pale with shock and something that looked like shame. "Eleanor, I had no idea she was planning." "Please don't apologize for her," I said quietly. Though my world was crumbling around me, I stood on unsteady legs and walked to my bedroom, the tiny room at the back of the house that I'd moved into 5 years ago when Catherine and Marcus needed the master suite temporarily after their condo flooded. 25 minutes later, I heard Catherine's determined footsteps pounding down the hallway. My door burst open without a knock. "Why haven't you started packing?" she demanded, her eyes blazing with impatience. "Catherine, please, can we discuss this rationally?" I pleaded, my voice shaking. "I have nowhere to go on such short notice." "You always have some excuse ready," she said, marching to my closet and yanking the door open with violent force. She began pulling out my clothes in great armfuls, my teaching blazers and sensible skirts, carrying them through the house like she was disposing of contaminated materials. I followed behind her, horrified and helpless, as she threw open the front door and hurled my belongings onto the front lawn. Neighbours walking their dogs stopped mid-stride to stare. "You've always been dead weight." She screamed loud enough for the entire street to hear. "Just vanished from our lives completely." My professional wardrobe, the clothes I'd worn proudly to parent conferences and faculty meetings for 35 years, scattered across the grass like fallen leaves. The navy dress I'd worn to Theodore's memorial service landed in a muddy puddle near the driveway. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face ashen with horror. "Catherine, stop this immediately. The neighbours are watching." "I don't care who sees," she shrieked back. "Let the whole world witness what a burden she's been to this family." I stood on the porch, tears streaming down my face in silent rivers. 68 years old, and I was being discarded like trash. Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street approached hesitantly, her expression filled with concern and confusion. "Eleanor, dear, do you need assistance?" Catherine spun toward her. "Mind your own business." I placed a trembling hand on Mrs. Rodriguez's shoulder. "It's all right," I whispered, though nothing could be further from the truth. As the autumn sun cast long, cold shadows across what had been my sanctuary, I knelt on the damp grass and began gathering my scattered possessions, folding each piece carefully despite my arthritic fingers. My entire adult life reduced to a few bags of personal effects and clothing. Marcus approached quietly, helping me collect my things while speaking in hushed, guilty tones. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I never imagined she would do something like this. I'll talk sense into her once she calms down." I looked back at the house where I'd nurtured my daughter through adolescence, where Theodore and I had planned our retirement, where his memories still lived in the garden he'd tended and the bookshelves he'd built. "I loved her from the moment I felt her first kick," I said softly. "I would have sacrificed everything for her happiness." As I drove away, watching my home shrink in the rearview mirror, I felt something deep inside me shatter completely. But underneath the devastation, underneath the betrayal, a small flame began to flicker. A flame that would soon ignite into something neither Catherine nor I could have anticipated. The compact apartment carried the scent of fresh paint and possibility. It wasn't luxurious, just a one-bedroom unit in a well-maintained senior community across town. But it offered something I desperately needed: safety. I sat on the narrow bed, surrounded by the meager possessions I'd rescued from my former life. 4 days had passed since Catherine had cast me out. 4 days of sobbing myself to sleep, startling at every phone ring hoping she might call to apologize, of questioning every decision I'd made as a mother. "You must eat something, Eleanor," Victoria urged, setting a ham sandwich on the small kitchen table. My dearest friend had sheltered me that first devastating night, then helped me secure this apartment within 48 hours. "I can't seem to work up an appetite," I admitted, though I couldn't recall my last proper meal. Victoria settled beside me, her weathered hand enveloping mine. "I've known you for 45 years and I've never seen you this broken. Please talk to me." I drew a shuddering breath. "I gave her absolutely everything, Victoria. My whole life revolved around her needs." "I watched you do it, honey. You were an extraordinary mother." After Theodore died, I threw myself into providing for her. 3 jobs during her high school years, tutoring sessions on weekends to pay for her college expenses, summer school teaching to afford those expensive spring break trips she insisted were educational experiences. Victoria nodded, her eyes reflecting the pain of watching a friend suffer. "And now," my voice fractured like thin ice, "she claims I've been nothing but a burden to her." "She's absolutely wrong," Victoria said with fierce conviction. "And somewhere in her heart she knows the truth." I shook my head slowly. "You didn't witness the hatred in her eyes, Victoria. The complete contempt." Victoria sighed deeply, standing to pace the small living room. "Well, there's something she's completely unaware of, isn't there? Something that might dramatically alter her perspective." I looked up sharply, my pulse quickening. "I've never shared that information with anyone except you." "Perhaps the time has come for honesty." I walked to my purse and retrieved a worn leather document folder, spreading it open on the table. Inside were financial statements, property deeds, and investment portfolios. "Theodore always had such vision for the future," I said tenderly, touching his signature on one of the documents. "When the doctors gave him his diagnosis, he knew our time was limited. The night before Theodore passed away, he made me promise something crucial. 'Don't reveal the investment portfolio to Catherine,' he'd whispered urgently. 'Not until she demonstrates real maturity. Wealth corrupts people's judgment, Eleanor.' The investments in question were a collection of rental properties Theodore had acquired over the years, seeming modest at the time, but now flourishing in the current market. When he died, they generated minimal income, just enough to supplement my teaching salary. But over the past 15 years, as the city expanded and property values soared, the portfolio had grown exponentially. "What's the current value?" Victoria asked, leaning forward with interest. "The most recent appraisal came in at just over $3.5 million, I said quietly. Victoria released a low whistle of amazement, and Catherine has absolutely no knowledge of this. None whatsoever. After Theodore's death, I was completely focused on survival, on ensuring Catherine had everything she needed for success. Later, when she was older, she never showed the financial responsibility necessary to handle such wealth. Remember those credit card disasters in college?" I nodded grimly. "And the car loans she defaulted on? And those emergency situations that always required me to drain my savings account to rescue her?" Victoria shook her head in disbelief. "So all these years you've been living frugally, sometimes struggling to make ends meet while sitting on a fortune. It was never about personal wealth, Victoria. It was about honouring Theodore's final wishes and waiting for Catherine to mature into someone worthy of that trust. And now," I closed the portfolio with new determination crystallising within me, "I understand she never will be." That afternoon, I made an appointment with Harrison Phillips, the attorney who had been Theodore's close friend and had handled our legal affairs for decades. "I need to restructure my entire will," I told him after explaining the recent events. Harrison leaned back in his leather chair, his expression grave with concern. "I always had reservations about you transferring the house to Catherine's name, Eleanor. I trusted her completely," I said simply. "That was my fundamental error." He nodded with understanding sympathy. "What modifications are you considering?" "I want the majority of the estate directed toward charitable organizations, specifically foundations that support elderly individuals who've been abandoned or mistreated by their families." The bitter irony wasn't lost on either of us. A substantial portion should establish an education trust for my grandson Daniel, managed by professional trustees rather than Catherine. And regarding Catherine herself, I paused, gathering my resolve, a modest inheritance, but with strict conditions attached. As Harrison drafted the new documents, I felt an enormous weight lifting from my shoulders. For years, I'd shielded Catherine from consequences, resolved her financial crises, excused her selfishness. That protection ended today. "I'd like a summary sent to Catherine," I said as I signed each page. "Not complete details, just enough information to make her aware that her mother possessed more substance than she assumed." Harrison raised a cautionary eyebrow. "Are you certain that's advisable?" "No," I admitted honestly, "but it's absolutely necessary." That evening, while arranging my few belongings in the apartment, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mom." Catherine's voice sounded completely transformed, controlled and artificially sweet. "I've been trying to contact you for hours." "Have you really?" I kept my tone carefully neutral. Though my heart was racing, "We need to have a serious conversation. I may have reacted too emotionally the other day." "Reacted emotionally?" I repeated her words back to her. "You threw my personal belongings into the yard and told me to disappear from your life forever." I was under tremendous stress. You understand how Marcus's business has been struggling, and Daniel's college preparations are so expensive and time-consuming. "What exactly do you want from me, Catherine?" I interrupted, something I'd rarely done in our entire relationship. A telling pause followed. "I received some correspondence from Harrison Phillips' office today. There it was, the real motivation." "Did you?" I kept my voice light and non-committal. "Mom, I had absolutely no idea about the investment properties, about any of these financial assets. Why didn't you ever tell me about them?" I sat down on my narrow bed, running my hand across the simple quilt. "Would that knowledge have changed how you treated me yesterday?" Another pause, much longer this time. "Of course it would have changed everything. You're my mother. I love you deeply." The words should have filled me with warmth, but instead they left me feeling cold and empty. 68 years of loving her unconditionally, and only now, when she discovered I possessed something valuable, did she claim to love me in return. "We should meet in person to discuss this properly," she continued smoothly. "Why don't you come home for dinner tomorrow evening? I'll prepare your favourite pot roast with all the trimmings." I closed my eyes, picturing her face not as it had been during her cruel tirade, but as it was when she was 7, gazing up at me with pure trust and adoration. When had that innocence transformed into manipulation? "I'll consider it," I said finally. "Wonderful. And Mom, I'm truly sorry about everything that happened." We all say hurtful things we don't mean when we're under pressure. As I ended the call, Victoria's words echoed in my mind, "Wealth corrupts people's judgment." Indeed, it did, but perhaps not in the way Catherine expected. Because while my daughter believed she'd just uncovered my secret, she had no comprehension of what I was actually planning. Catherine's house, my former home, appeared exactly the same as I pulled into the familiar driveway. Yet everything had fundamentally changed. The porch light glowed warmly, welcoming me back to a place that had expelled me just 1 week earlier. I sat in my car for several minutes, summoning my strength for the confrontation ahead. The front door opened before I could approach it. Catherine stood there, hair professionally styled, wearing an elegant floral dress I'd never seen before. "Mom," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I'm so grateful you decided to come." She moved to embrace me and I returned it stiffly, noticing how she seemed to recoil slightly from the scent of my modest apartment that had replaced my familiar lavender perfume. "Please come in. Make yourself comfortable," she urged, guiding me inside as if I were an honored guest rather than the woman who had raised her within these very walls. The dining room had been completely transformed. Candles flickered romantically on the table, fine china was displayed, and the rich aroma of pot roast, indeed my favourite, filled the air. Marcus stood awkwardly near the kitchen entrance, his expression mixing shame with relief. "Eleanor," he said quietly, stepping forward to take my coat. "It's wonderful to see you again." "Is it truly?" I asked directly. His eyes dropped to the floor. "Yes, absolutely it is," Catherine quickly intervened. "Daniel is at a friend's house working on a group project. He'll be so disappointed he missed seeing you." I nodded, though I suspected my 16-year-old grandson had been deliberately sent away for this performance. "Can I offer you some wine, Mom?" Catherine asked, already pouring a glass of expensive red that she knew I occasionally enjoyed on special occasions. "No, thank you," I replied firmly. "I prefer to maintain a clear head tonight." Something flickered across her features. Annoyance, perhaps, but her smile never wavered. "Of course, how about water or tea?" "Water will be sufficient." We took our seats at the table, the silence broken only by the gentle clinking of silverware against plates. Finally, Catherine cleared her throat delicately. "Mom, I want to offer my sincere apologies for what transpired last week. I was overwhelmed by stress and took my frustrations out on you. My behavior was completely inexcusable." I met her gaze steadily. "Yet here you are requesting my forgiveness." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We all make terrible mistakes," Catherine continued, reaching across to touch my hand. I resisted the impulse to pull away. "Family members should support each other through difficult times. Don't you agree?" "Is that what you believed when you threw my possessions onto the lawn?" Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mom, please. I'm making a genuine effort here. What exactly are you trying to accomplish?" "Catherine?" I glanced briefly at Marcus. "To repair our relationship, naturally. To bring you back home where you belong." "Home," I repeated the words slowly. "This ceased being my home the moment you declared me a burden." "I didn't mean those words," she insisted desperately. "I was simply experiencing a temporary lapse in judgment." I took a small bite of pot roast, chewing thoughtfully. "Harrison Phillips mentioned that you contacted his office 6 times since receiving that copy of my revised will." Catherine's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I was concerned for your well-being, that's all." Learning about the investment portfolio was such a tremendous shock. Was it the investments that shocked you? Or discovering that your supposedly helpless mother isn't as powerless as you assumed? Her carefully constructed facade began to crack slightly. "Mom, you never shared any of this information with me. All these years we could have." "Could have what?" I interrupted sharply. "Liquidated the properties, spent the money carelessly, lived beyond our means?" "That's not fair to say," she protested. "We've faced genuine financial challenges, especially with Marcus's business difficulties last year." Marcus looked down at his plate uncomfortably. "Catherine, perhaps we shouldn't." "No, Marcus," I said calmly. "Let her continue. I'm curious about these financial challenges she's describing." Catherine straightened, apparently encouraged by the opening. "Well, Daniel's private school tuition isn't inexpensive, and the house needs a complete roof replacement. And there's the pool maintenance costs, and my car is 4 years old now." As she enumerated her list of expenses, luxuries rather than necessities, I thought about my tiny apartment, about how I'd been carefully budgeting every dollar to afford my arthritis medications. "I understand," I said when she finally paused. And these challenges justified expelling your mother onto the street. I've already explained that I wasn't thinking rationally, she said, her patience clearly wearing thin. But now we can begin fresh. You can move back home and we can manage the investment portfolio together as a family. There it was. The genuine reason behind the candles, the pot roast, the apologies. Actually, I said with complete composure, I'm quite content in my new living situation. But it's so cramped, Catherine protested. And that neighborhood. It's perfect for my needs, and the neighbors are incredibly kind. One of them, Grace, introduced me to a support group for people in similar situations. Support group? Marcus asked, speaking for the first time since we'd sat down. For elderly individuals who've been mistreated or abandoned by their families, I explained matter-of-factly. It's been remarkably enlightening. Catherine's expression darkened noticeably. You're discussing our private family matters with complete strangers, exposing our personal business. I'm simply sharing my experiences, I said calmly. It's therapeutic to know I'm not alone in this situation. This is absolutely ridiculous, Catherine snapped, her mask of sweetness finally slipping away. You're being manipulated and exploited by these people. I couldn't suppress a laugh. That's remarkably ironic coming from you. Her face flushed with anger. What exactly is that supposed to mean? It means I'm aware of your credit card debt, Catherine. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Marcus's head snapped up, his eyes wide with confusion and alarm. What credit card debt? He asked slowly. Catherine shot me a warning look, but I continued calmly. The 4 cards you've been concealing from Marcus. The $32,000 you've spent over the past 18 months on clothing. Spa treatments. And that weekend trip to Las Vegas with your friends. The one you told Marcus was a professional conference. How did you? Catherine started, then caught herself. Marcus turned to his wife, his expression hardening with realization. Is this true? I was planning to tell you, she stammered weakly. I just needed to find the right opportunity. There's more, I said, looking directly at Marcus. The reason Catherine was so desperate to remove me from this house wasn't just about inconvenience. She's been planning to secure a home equity loan, but couldn't proceed with me still living here due to legal complications with the property transfer. Marcus's face went pale with shock. We discussed this extensively. We agreed never to borrow against the house. Catherine stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is none of her business whatsoever. It became my business when you made me homeless, I replied, remaining seated and composed. The perfect dinner was now completely ruined. Catherine's carefully orchestrated performance had collapsed, revealing the truth I'd known all along. Her sudden change of heart had nothing to do with genuine remorse and everything to do with what she hoped to gain from me. As I stood to leave, I felt no sense of victory, only profound sadness for what our relationship had become and quiet determination about my next steps. I believe we're finished here, I said softly. Thank you for the meal. Marcus rose quickly from his chair. I'll walk you to your car, Eleanor. Outside on the porch, away from Catherine's hearing, he spoke in hushed, urgent tones. I had no knowledge of any of this. The credit cards, the loan plans. I swear to you. I believe you, I said, and I truly did. Marcus had always been passive, but never intentionally cruel. What happens now? He asked anxiously. I looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the evening sky. The same stars I'd pointed out to Catherine when she was a child, teaching her to make wishes on the brightest ones. Now, I said quietly, we all live with the consequences of our choices. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Marcus stood alone on the porch, watching me leave while inside a new storm was undoubtedly brewing. I had planted the seeds of truth, and now I would let them take root and grow. 3 weeks passed without any communication from Catherine or Marcus. Each day, I settled more deeply into my new life. My compact apartment gradually transformed into a true home, a sanctuary decorated with the precious keepsakes I'd managed to preserve. Theodore's reading glasses, our wedding photograph, the handmade ceramic bowl Catherine had crafted for me in 3rd grade during her art class. Small treasures that carried the weight of decades of memories. I'd just returned from my support group meeting when my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. Eleanor. His voice sounded strained and exhausted. Can we talk for a few minutes? Of course, I replied, setting down my purse. Is everything all right? He released a bitter laugh. Not remotely. Catherine and I. Things have been extremely difficult since your dinner visit. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. though I wasn't entirely surprised by this development. Don't apologize. It needed to happen. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I've been examining our finances in detail. The situation is much worse than I ever imagined. Catastrophically worse. I waited patiently, allowing him to continue at his own pace. She's been concealing things for years, Eleanor. Not just credit cards. There are personal loans, online shopping accounts with astronomical balances. She even stole money from Daniel's college fund. My heart ached at the mention of my grandson. How much? I asked quietly. Nearly $12,000. She claimed she was borrowing it temporarily, but his voice trailed off in despair. Marcus, I'm so sorry. The thing is, he continued, she's still completely obsessed with your investment portfolio. She talks constantly about what we could accomplish with that money, how it would solve all our problems, as if $3.5 million would just materialize in her hands. I closed my eyes, Theodore's warnings echoing clearly in my mind. He'd been absolutely right all along. Eleanor, she's planning something drastic. She wants to challenge your new will in court. She's claiming you're not mentally competent to manage your own affairs. She's already consulted with a lawyer. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I see. I completely disagree with all of this, he added quickly. That's exactly why I'm calling. You deserve to know what's coming your way. Thank you, Marcus. That's very decent of you. It's the absolute least I can do, he said quietly. After everything that's happened, after we ended the call, I sat motionless for several minutes, processing what I'd learned. Then I made my own call to Harrison Phillips. The following Saturday, I received a text message from Catherine asking me to meet her for coffee. I deliberately chose a public location, a busy cafe downtown where the constant buzz of conversation would provide both background noise and witnesses. I arrived early, selecting a table in the back corner with a clear view of the entrance. When Catherine walked in, I barely recognized the woman before me. The carefully maintained appearance she'd presented at our dinner was completely gone. Her hair was pulled back carelessly. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her clothing, while still expensive, looked wrinkled and unkempt. Mom, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Thank you for agreeing to meet. You sounded urgent in your message, I replied neutrally. She ordered a triple espresso, her fingers tapping nervously on the table while we waited. Marcus and I are having serious problems, she finally admitted. He's being completely unreasonable about everything. I took a careful sip of my tea. In what way is he being unreasonable? He's obsessing over our finances, threatening to separate all our accounts. He's even mentioned the possibility of divorce. Her voice cracked on the final word. That must be very difficult for you. She looked up sharply, perhaps expecting more sympathy than I'd offered. It's partially his fault too, you know. His business has been struggling for years. If he were more successful professionally, we wouldn't be in this desperate position. I studied my daughter's face. The same face I'd once watched in wonder as she took her first steps, spoke her first words. Where had that innocent child disappeared to? What position is that exactly? I asked. Drowning in debt, she admitted reluctantly. But everyone carries debt these days. It's completely normal. Not everyone conceals it from their spouse, I pointed out calmly, or steals money from their child's education fund. Her eyes widened with shock. He told you about Daniel's college fund? It was supposed to be temporary. I fully intended to replace that money. With what resources, Catherine? She leaned forward desperately, lowering her voice. That's actually why I wanted to speak with you today. This situation with the will, the investment portfolio, we can work out some kind of arrangement, can't we? I'm your daughter, your only child. Yes, you are, I agreed, which is precisely why your actions have hurt me so profoundly. I've apologized repeatedly for that, she exclaimed, drawing disapproving glances from nearby tables. What more do you expect from me? I don't expect anything from you, Catherine. That's what you fail to understand. She sat back, genuine confusion crossing her features. Then why are we here having this conversation? Because you requested this meeting, and because I believe it's time we were completely honest with each other. Her expression hardened defensively. What's that supposed to mean exactly? It means I know you're planning to contest my will in court, to claim I'm not mentally competent to manage my own financial affairs. Catherine's mouth opened, then closed without sound. For once in her life, she seemed completely at a loss for words. Marcus told you, she finally said, her voice flat and defeated. He was concerned about the direction you're heading. He had absolutely no right to interfere. This is strictly between you and me. No, Catherine. This is about you wanting my money. Money you didn't even know existed until 3 weeks ago. It's not simply about money, she insisted desperately. It's about fairness, about family loyalty. That investment portfolio should remain in the family. And what would you do with it? Pay off your secret credit cards? Purchase a new luxury car? Take another expensive trip to Las Vegas? Her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You're being deliberately cruel to me. I'm being realistic, I corrected. Your father was absolutely right to keep this information from you. You've never demonstrated financial responsibility, and you've never faced genuine consequences for your poor decisions. So this is punishment? For what? For being human and making mistakes? I shook my head slowly. This isn't punishment, Catherine. It's me finally establishing healthy boundaries. By giving away what should rightfully be my inheritance. Her voice rose again, attracting more attention. To charitable causes your father and I believed in deeply, to your son's future education, and yes, a portion to you, but with strict conditions that will actually help you develop responsibility rather than enabling more destructive behavior. She stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over her untouched espresso cup. This isn't finished. You can't do this to me. I'm not doing anything to you, I said with complete calm. I'm making informed decisions about my own property and my own money. We'll see what a judge thinks about that, she threatened. When they hear how you abandoned your own family, how you're mentally unstable and being manipulated by strangers. Sit down, Catherine, I said, my voice quiet but absolutely firm. Something in my tone made her hesitate. She slowly lowered herself back into her chair. Before you proceed down that path, I continued, you should understand that Harrison Phillips has been carefully documenting everything. Your sudden change of heart after learning about the portfolio, your concealed debts, even your current plan to contest the will. I've been evaluated by 2 separate medical professionals who can testify to my complete mental competence. And your threats today are being recorded. Her face went completely pale. You're bluffing. I slid my phone across the table, its screen clearly showing an active recording in progress. You deliberately set me up, she whispered in shock. I protected myself, I corrected. Something I should have done many years ago. For a brief moment, Catherine looked exactly like the little girl who'd been caught stealing cookies from the kitchen jar. Scared, defensive, but underneath it all, aware that she'd done something wrong. Then her expression hardened once again. You think you've won this battle, don't you? She said with bitter resentment. Fine. Keep your precious money. I don't need it anymore. I don't need you either. She stood again, grabbing her purse roughly. Marcus is leaving me anyway. Daniel barely acknowledges my existence. Are you satisfied now? You've destroyed everything. As she stormed out of the cafe, leaving me alone at the table, I felt no sense of victory, only profound sadness. I hadn't destroyed anything in Catherine's life. She had lost it all herself, piece by piece, choice by poor choice. Later that evening, as I sat on my small balcony watching the sunset paint the sky, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus. Daniel would like to see you. Would tomorrow afternoon work? For the first time in weeks, I felt a genuine glimmer of hope. Perhaps not everything was lost after all. The park bench felt cool beneath me as I watched Daniel throw breadcrumbs to the eager ducks crowding the pond's edge. At 16, my grandson was navigating that awkward transition between adolescence and adulthood. Lanky limbs he hadn't quite grown into, a voice that occasionally cracked unexpectedly, but eyes that held wisdom far beyond his years. Marcus sat beside me, his posture more relaxed than I'd seen in months. We'd been here for nearly 2 hours, the 3 of us simply enjoying a peaceful afternoon that felt surprisingly normal despite the chaos of recent weeks. He's missed you tremendously, Marcus said quietly, nodding toward Daniel. He was absolutely furious when he discovered what happened. He shouldn't be caught in the middle of adult problems, I replied with concern. He's not a child anymore, Eleanor. He sees and understands more than we give him credit for. Marcus sighed deeply, running a hand through his greying hair. Eleanor, I need to tell you something important. I've filed for divorce from Catherine. I turned to study his face, seeing the mixture of pain and relief etched in his features. Are you certain that's what you want? I asked gently. It's what absolutely needs to happen, he said with conviction. After everything came to light, the deception, the lies, what she did to you, I realized this isn't new behavior. It's who she's fundamentally always been. I just refused to acknowledge it. I nodded, thinking of all the times I'd made the same choice, turning a blind eye to Catherine's manipulations because confronting the truth was too painful. She wasn't always like this, I said softly. When she was small, she was so affectionate, so generous with her love. What transformed her into this person? I shook my head sadly. I've asked myself that question thousands of times. Perhaps it was losing her father so young. Maybe it was my fault for overindulging her, trying to compensate for Theodore's absence. You can't blame yourself for her adult choices, Eleanor. Can't I? I'm her mother. I shaped who she became. Daniel jogged back to us, pockets empty of breadcrumbs, cheeks flushed from the crisp autumn air. The ducks are demanding more, he announced with a bright grin. Tell them they've had plenty already, Marcus replied, smiling genuinely at his son. We should probably head home anyway. Your grandmother might have other plans. Actually, I don't have any plans, I said. Would you both like to come back to my apartment? It's not much space, but I could make hot chocolate. Daniel's face lit up with enthusiasm. With marshmallows? Is there any other acceptable way? I laughed. An hour later, my tiny apartment was filled with more genuine laughter than it had known since I'd moved in. Daniel explored every corner with curiosity, admiring the few photographs I'd managed to save, asking thoughtful questions about my life before he was born. Is this Grandpa Theodore? He asked, pointing to a faded picture of Theodore standing beside our old Chevrolet. Yes, I said, smiling warmly at the memory. That photograph was taken the summer before you were born. He was incredibly excited about becoming a grandfather. Mom never talks about him, Daniel said, his expression growing thoughtful. She doesn't really talk about you either. It's like the family history just started with her generation. Marcus and I exchanged meaningful glances. Your mother has her own way of processing the past, I said carefully, not wanting to criticize her to her son. Daniel set down the photograph gently. You mean she lies about everything? Daniel, Marcus warned softly. It's true, Dad. She lies about everything. Where she goes, who she spends time with, how much money she spends. He looked at me with those perceptive eyes. I heard her on the phone yesterday talking to someone about challenging Grandma's will. She said she'd say whatever was necessary to get the money. My heart ached for this young man caught in the crossfire of adult dysfunction. I'm sorry you had to hear that conversation. Daniel shrugged with teenage resignation. I'm not a little kid anymore. I understand Mom has serious problems. Marcus placed a supportive hand on his son's shoulder. We're going to work through this situation together, son. Things might be different for a while, but we'll be fine. As they prepared to leave, Daniel hugged me tightly. Can I come back tomorrow? I have this chemistry project due, and Dad's completely hopeless with science. I laughed heartily. Hey now, Marcus protested, but he was smiling too. Of course you can come back, I told Daniel warmly. Anytime you want. After they left, I sat quietly in my living room, savoring the lingering warmth their presence had brought to my small space. For the first time since Catherine had expelled me from my home, I felt genuine peace and possibility for the future. The next morning I was awakened by insistent, aggressive knocking. Pulling on my robe, I opened the door to find Catherine standing there, her face contorted with rage and desperation. How dare you interfere, she hissed, pushing past me into the apartment without invitation. Catherine, what are you? You turned them both against me, she accused, whirling to face me with wild eyes. Marcus is filing for divorce. Did you know that? And now he's poisoning Daniel's mind against me, too. I didn't turn anyone against you, I said calmly, though my heart was racing with adrenaline. Marcus made his own decision based on what he discovered about your behavior. Because you told him about the credit cards, about Las Vegas. You lied to your husband, Catherine. You stole from your son's college fund. Those were your choices, not mine. She paced my small living room like a caged animal, her movements erratic and desperate. He's trying to take everything from me. The house, full custody of Daniel. He claims I'm unstable and unfit. Me? Unfit? After he abandoned our marriage at the first sign of difficulty. Is that really how you see this situation? I asked quietly. She stopped pacing abruptly, her eyes wild with confusion. What do you mean by that? Marcus didn't abandon your marriage, Catherine. He's responding to years of deception and betrayal. There's a significant difference. Oh, so now you're taking his side, she spat venomously. My own mother choosing strangers over me. I'm not taking anyone's side, Catherine. I'm simply trying to see the situation clearly and honestly. She laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and broken. Right. That's why you're letting my son come here filling his head with lies about me. Daniel asked to see me, I said firmly, and we don't discuss you during his visits. I don't believe you for 1 second. She glanced around the apartment with obvious disdain. Look at this pathetic place. You're living like some tragic victim when we both know you're sitting on millions of dollars. I took a deep, steadying breath. Money isn't everything, Catherine. Easy words from someone who has it, she exploded. Do you have any idea what's happening to my life? Everything is falling apart completely. The bank called about missed mortgage payments. My credit cards are all maxed out beyond their limits. And now Marcus is threatening to expose every detail in the divorce proceedings. I'm sorry you're struggling, I said, and despite everything, I truly meant it. This was still my daughter, still the child I'd raised and loved. But I can't rescue you from this situation. You could help me, she insisted, her voice dropping to something almost pleading. You could save me, Mom. Just this one time, alone to get me back on my feet. That's all I'm asking for. I promise I'll pay back every penny. For a moment I wavered. The maternal instinct to protect and rescue was incredibly powerful, deeply ingrained after decades of motherhood. But then I remembered my belongings scattered across the lawn, the cruel words she'd screamed, the years of manipulation and lies. No, Catherine, I said softly but firmly. I won't enable your destructive behavior anymore. Her face transformed completely, vulnerability replaced by cold, calculating fury. You'll regret this decision, she hissed with genuine menace. I'm not finished fighting for what's rightfully mine. And when I win this battle, don't expect any mercy or forgiveness from me. Is that really what your father and I raised you to become? I asked, my voice breaking slightly with emotion. Someone who threatens her own mother? Something flickered briefly in her eyes, doubt perhaps, or a fleeting moment of self-awareness. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. You're the one who changed everything, she accused bitterly. You're the one who turned your back on your own family. As she stormed out, slamming the door with tremendous force, I sank onto the couch, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The encounter had left me deeply shaken, but also strangely resolved about my path forward. This wasn't simply about money anymore. It was about breaking a destructive pattern that had persisted for far too long. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Coffee this afternoon? I have someone special I'd like you to meet. I hesitated only briefly before typing back my acceptance. I'd love to meet them. It was time to start truly living my life again. Not as Catherine's mother or Theodore's widow, but as Eleanor, a woman with her own journey still unfolding ahead of her. 6 months can transform everything. As spring blossoms brightened the city parks with vibrant colour, I sat in Harrison Phillips' office, finalising the details of my comprehensive estate plan. The winter had been long and challenging in many ways, but as the days gradually lengthened, so too had my sense of purpose and direction grown stronger. Everything appears to be in perfect order, Harrison said, sliding the final documents across his mahogany desk. The education trust for Daniel is completely secure. The charitable foundation is properly established, and the conditions for Catherine's portion are clearly outlined and legally binding. I signed each page with careful, deliberate strokes. And it's absolutely uncontestable? I asked. Nothing is completely ironclad in legal terms, Harrison admitted honestly. But we've taken every possible precaution. The medical evaluations, the thoroughly documented history of her behavior patterns, her financial mismanagement. It would be extremely difficult for her to successfully challenge this will. And Marcus's testimony would be invaluable if needed. Harrison nodded approvingly. His sworn statement is remarkably powerful, as is Daniel's, though I sincerely hope it never comes to requiring their testimony. I placed the pen down carefully, feeling an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. Thank you, Harrison, for everything you've done. Theodore would be incredibly proud of you, Eleanor, he said gently. You've honoured his deepest wishes while also carving out your own independent path. As I left the office, warm spring sunshine caressing my face, I reflected on how dramatically everything had changed since that terrible Thanksgiving when Catherine had cast me out. The pain hadn't completely disappeared. I doubted it ever would entirely. But it had transformed into something else entirely. Something that propelled me forward rather than anchoring me to the past. I walked 3 blocks to the community college where, at 68, I had enrolled in a literature course. It had been Victoria's suggestion, a way to fulfill the educational dreams I'd set aside after Theodore died when raising Catherine became my sole focus. "You're perfectly on time," Professor Jenkins said as I slipped into the familiar classroom. "We were just about to discuss your essay on Jane Austen's social commentary." My classmates, most young enough to be my grandchildren, turned to smile at me warmly. Over the past months, I'd evolved from being the elderly woman in the back row to simply Eleanor, whose insights they genuinely respected and whose homemade cookies they eagerly anticipated each Thursday. After class, I checked my phone to find a message from Marcus. Daniel received an A on his chemistry project. He insists he couldn't have achieved it without his grandmother's guidance. "Dinner tonight to celebrate?" I smiled broadly, typing back my enthusiastic acceptance. My relationship with my grandson had flourished in ways I'd never anticipated. 3 evenings each week he visited my apartment, sometimes accompanied by Marcus, sometimes alone, for homework assistance, cooking lessons, or simply meaningful conversation. He had become the bridge connecting my past to my future, a constant reminder that family bonds could heal as well as wound. Marcus, too, had evolved into an unexpected ally and friend. As his divorce proceedings with Catherine continued, he'd made it absolutely clear that I would always be Daniel's grandmother, always welcome in their lives. His genuine kindness had helped ease the persistent ache of Catherine's ongoing rejection. My final stop of the day was the coffee shop where I was meeting Victoria and William. The thought of William brought an involuntary smile to my face and a flutter to my heart that I hadn't experienced in decades. I'd met him 4 months ago, Victoria's recently widowed brother-in-law, a retired English professor with kind, intelligent eyes and a dry wit that perfectly matched my own. Our friendship had developed slowly and cautiously, both of us carrying the weight of profound past losses. "There she is," William said warmly as I approached their familiar table. He stood to pull out my chair, a gentlemanly gesture that always made Victoria roll her eyes with good-natured exasperation. "How did the meeting with Harrison proceed?" Victoria asked, pushing a steaming cup of tea toward me. She always thoughtfully ordered for me when I was running late. "Everything is completely settled," I replied with satisfaction. "It feels wonderfully final." William's hand covered mine briefly. "Are you comfortable with that finality?" I nodded with confidence. "It's definitely time. The property development begins next month. The proceeds will fund everything we discussed in detail. Daniel's education, the Senior Advocacy Foundation, and yes, Catherine's conditional trust fund." "Has she attempted to contact you recently?" Victoria asked with concern. "Not directly. Marcus mentioned that she's been sober for 3 months now, attending mandatory therapy sessions as part of their custody arrangement. After Catherine's last explosive visit to my apartment, her life had spiraled even further downward. She'd lost her job due to erratic behavior, been arrested for driving under the influence, and finally hit the rock bottom that forced her to confront her issues with money, alcohol, and destructive relationships. The divorce had been finalized 4 months ago, with Marcus receiving primary custody of Daniel. "Do you believe she'll accept the conditions of the trust?" William asked thoughtfully. I sipped my tea, considering the question carefully. "I honestly don't know, but the conditions are absolutely non-negotiable. She receives a modest monthly stipend, but the bulk of her inheritance remains in trust unless she maintains complete sobriety and successfully completes comprehensive financial counseling." "You're doing exactly the right thing," Victoria assured me firmly. "It's tough love, but it's still fundamentally love." Later that evening, as Marcus, Daniel, and I celebrated over pizza in my now thoroughly cozy apartment, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "Mom, I'd like to talk when you're ready. Catherine." I showed the message to Marcus, whose eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "That's completely unexpected." "She's been doing better recently," Daniel offered cautiously. "My therapist mentioned we might try supervised visits soon." I nodded thoughtfully, tucking the phone away. I would eventually respond to Catherine, but not tonight. Tonight was for celebration, for the family that had reformed itself from the ashes of betrayal and pain. After they left, I sat on my small balcony, watching the city lights twinkle against the darkening sky like earthbound stars. William had invited me to join him for a weekend trip to the coast next month. My first real vacation in years. The Senior Advocacy Foundation I'd established with part of Theodore's investment proceeds was already actively helping other elderly individuals who had experienced abuse or abandonment. And next week, I would begin volunteering at the community centre, teaching a creative writing class for seniors. My life, which had seemed irreparably shattered 6 months ago, had reassembled itself into something entirely new, something that belonged completely to me. The phone in my lap buzzed again. William. Thinking of you tonight. Sleep peacefully, Eleanor. I smiled warmly, typing back a response. Then I glanced at Catherine's earlier message, still awaiting my reply. With careful consideration, I composed my answer. I'm ready to listen when you're truly ready to talk honestly. Coffee next week? Whatever came next with my daughter. Whether reconciliation, continued rejection, or something in between, I would face it entirely on my own terms. The woman who had stood weeping on a front lawn, watching her belongings being thrown onto the grass like garbage, no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and finally authentically free. As I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The silver hair I'd stopped colouring artificially. The laugh lines I'd stopped trying to conceal. The clear eyes that had witnessed both devastating heartbreak and remarkable healing. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I truly recognized myself. We accomplished it, Theodore, I whispered to the quiet room. We found our way through the darkness. The path stretching ahead would certainly have its challenges. Catherine's recovery remained fragile and uncertain. My relationship with William was still new and developing slowly. Rebuilding damaged family bonds required patience and time, but I was no longer afraid of what might come. Whatever the future held, I would meet it with the quiet strength I'd discovered within myself. The strength that had been there all along, simply waiting for the right moment to emerge. Eleanor's final smile wasn't a farewell, but a beginning. The start of a life reclaimed, a heart renewed, and a spirit that remained unbroken despite everything it had endured. In the morning, I would wake to possibilities I couldn't have imagined 6 months ago. I would continue building this new life piece by piece, day by day, choice by choice. And I would do it with the knowledge that the greatest inheritance I could leave behind wasn't money or property, but the example of a woman who had learned, even at 68, that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to start over completely, to discover joy again. That was Theodore's true legacy. And now, finally, it was mine as well.